Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Apurva, a neurologic physical therapist and the owner of BeyondRehab. BeyondRehab is a digital neuro rehab and wellness company. At BeyondRehab, our focus is primarily working with Parkinson's disease, dystonia, and other movement disorder. Today, I have a pleasure of being joined by Joe Drake. Joe is the author of the book Run With It and a world marathon runner. Joe completed his first marathon race in 2019 at the age of 58 following his Parkinson's diagnosis. As of May 2023, he has completed an astounding 18 marathon races. Joe's new purpose is to inspire others with Parkinson's and other disease or medical condition to cope through a considered and comprehensive regimen of vigorous exercise. Congratulations on completing 18th race last week, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that introduction, Apurva. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you today.
Likewise. So I like to get started and talk about Parkinson's journey and your decision on starting or committing to marathon training.
Sure. So I was diagnosed in 2018. I was just about to turn 57. And at my diagnosis, I had a very good neurologist. And one of the things she told me at that first meeting was that vigorous exercise was the best therapy for Parkinson's disease. I've since learned a lot more about that in the time that since that diagnosis. But what I heard was vigorous exercise, and that's something that I like to do. So I thought, well, that's great. That's perfect for me. And so I started thinking about how to do that. I've done a lot of exercise. I've bicycled, triathlons, swimming, that sort of thing, soccer. And I ended up gravitating to running as my go-to exercise for dealing with Parkinson's. And I also felt at that time that I had a sense of urgency in all of this. I wanted to get started right away because I really didn't know how much longer I had in terms of quality years left, because who knew what Parkinson's was going to put me through after that point. So I started exercising, running more, and up until that point, I had only run maybe at the most 6 miles at a time. But with this new diagnosis, I said, well, how much farther can I go? And I started creeping that up into 8 miles and 10 miles. And I thought, well, let's try a half marathon. And if that goes well, let's try a marathon. The half marathon went well, and I decided to go for a marathon. And I've been running marathons ever since.
Amazing. So how did you guide yourself in preparing, actively coping, and managing your Parkinson's condition as you were committing to the new exercise regimen, running, long distance running?
Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly, I knew how to run, but I didn't know how to run a marathon. It's an entirely different story there. And there's a lot more involved in training when you're running that kind of distance. So first of all, I started reading a lot more about running because I needed a training plan for my first marathon. I needed some strategies for how to do that training. I knew from the past, friends of mine who have tried to train for marathons, a lot of them didn't make it all the way through the training plan because the training itself is very vigorous and can lead to injuries, and it's easy to get derailed. So I did a lot of studying on that. And then sort of in a way, kind of accidentally, a local store here in Seattle, running store, I went there and to get my equipment and other accessories and that sort of thing. And I enjoyed the experience so much as a customer there, that one time when I walked in, there was a help wanted sign out front, and I said, why not? I was already retired. I decided to retire as a result of my diagnosis so that I could focus on my health and enjoying life at that point. So I applied, and then I worked for 2 years in that running store, which was a great experience. And it was like immersion learning about running. And a lot of what I learned about how to tackle a marathon came from becoming a good employee of that store and being able to talk to customers and guide them. And in that way, I was guiding myself.
Amazing. So how does your typical week looks like when you're in the run or like training phase?
Yeah, the training phase is I'm sure people who know about marathons is it tends to vary from week to week, but on average, if I have a marathon coming up, I'm going to start training 16 weeks ahead of time.
Okay.
And with the 16th week being the race day. And then this last training cycle that I did, I averaged about 40 miles a week.
Oh, wow.
And I typically would run 5 days a week, so take 2 days off for rest or cross training. Cross training in this case is usually stretching, mobility exercises, and some strengthening. On those 5 runs per week, a lot of them are in the range of 3 to 7 miles, and then there's typically a long run each week. And that long run could be anywhere from 13 to 23 miles, depending on where you are in that 16-week cycle.
Nice. And after the training phase and the marathon running, like how do you do the rest recovery period?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. On one hand, since that diagnosis, since my first marathon, I have always had another marathon lined up. So there hasn't been a dead period between marathons, but there is certainly a recovery period. And I know that some people are very cautious about taking several weeks off from running after you've done a large race. But keep in mind that for Parkinson's, the running is our medicine. And so it's not, in my view, it's not attractive to me to stop running for several weeks. Taking 2 days off after a marathon is pretty typical for me. And then I'll get back into training again. But there's things that you need to do for your body besides the resting. There's massage treatments for your legs to pull lactic acid and other poisons out of the muscles, and a little bit of stretching just to keep them limber and all that. But and certainly some sleep, some rest. But otherwise, it's for me, it's get back out there as soon as I feel like I can do that.
Nice. What are the challenges you have encountered while you've been training yourself and focusing on a series of marathon running?
Well, the challenges usually come down to, well, let's say right now I've been doing it constantly for the last 4 years, so I've overcome most of those challenges. But for any runner, there's the mental aspect of training, putting in those kind of miles, and sometimes you're running for very long distances. Your mind wants you to stop because it might be boring, it might be tedious, it's something that you're just not enjoying that much. And so there's a big challenge in overcoming that. There's a big challenge in making that all into a positive experience.
Uh-huh.
Now, one thing to recognize is that the whole story about Parkinson's is a story about dopamine. Dopamine is in deficit for Parkinson's because certain neurons in the brain are dying, and those neurons are the ones that make the dopamine. And dopamine has its functions. It functions as a neurotransmitter for motions, motor control, that sort of thing. But it's also responsible for a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction, and the enjoyment that you get out of activities where you've had a sense of accomplishment or achievement. So it's important in my mind to make sure that that sense, that you're always trying to enhance your sense of accomplishment or achievement. So when you go on your first 10-mile run, applaud yourself. And that's something that is something that a lot of people won't do ever. And so it's important to give yourself a pat on the back. It's also important to recognize that when you run your first half marathon or your marathon, this whole sense of positivity, having a positive mindset, is important to cultivate in your training. It's important for Parkinson's patients, whether or not they choose to take up vigorous exercise. It's extremely important to have that sense of positivity, because it is, besides vigorous exercise, I think it's a #1 therapy to dealing with the disease and thriving with it. So sometimes I challenge myself with ridiculous things just to have that sense of accomplishment. Like, for example, on almost a whim, I decided I was going to run a marathon on a quarter-mile track that we have local here. So that's 105 laps continuously on a quarter-mile track. And that's something that people don't normally do. I got great enjoyment out of knowing that. And then that ends up becoming a conversation starter for a lot of people who realize that I've done that and want to talk about it. So there's lots of ways to, in answering your question, that mental challenge is almost more important than the physical challenge, because once you've convinced your mind that you can do these sorts of things, your body's going to come along.
No, that's well said. And we need to always celebrate the small wins and have that positive mindset on gradually accomplishing the goals one step at a time.
That's right.
So how have you seen like the exercise along with medication impacting your disease, like the positive changes?
Yeah, so when I first was diagnosed, I had a lot of the symptoms that are typical of Parkinson's. I had a slight tremor, and I'll say this right off the bat, that my symptoms were never super difficult, like I know a lot of people who are struggling with disease have. I had a tremor. I had balance issues, certainly a lot of fatigue, loss of strength, and I would stumble a lot when I was walking. I lost a lot of coordination. And I used to play soccer a lot, and over the last few years prior to diagnosis, I was getting to the point where routine plays I couldn't make anymore. And in fact, there were so many times I'd go out to play soccer, and I kind of was hoping that the ball wouldn't come near me, because I knew that chances are I was going to mess it up. This was before I knew that I had Parkinson's. Since then, when I got the diagnosis and I started taking the medication, in my case, that medication initially was Sinemet, carbidopa, levodopa, immediately the symptoms improved. And so I was suddenly able to play soccer well, and run again, and a lot of my symptoms had diminished. The slight tremor I had in my arm got to be less severe, that sort of thing. And then as I coupled that with the exercise, within a year or so, I was starting to doubt whether I even had the disease, because the symptoms were so diminished that I no longer really felt them that much. So I did do an experiment, and I stopped my medication just to see what would happen, and I found out that the medication, which now was Cinemet plus another drug that I take called selegiline, which
Okay.
is a MAOB inhibitor.
Mm-hmm.
That combination gives me more stamina, gives me more endurance. So I know now that it is actually, the medication enables my ability to do the exercise that I need to slow the progression of the disease.
I see.
So it's that combination that makes a big difference for me.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen any difference, like on in your symptoms post marathon phase?
Post marathon, no, I think that I'm right now, I'm sort of in a steady state.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that as long as I keep the medication at a constant level, and that together with the marathoning, I'm in pretty good shape. That every week I'm pretty good, but there are symptoms
Mm-hmm.
of Parkinson's that tend to show up more in a marathon. Like, for example, I sweat a lot. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
very salty sweater, so that means that I can get dehydrated very quickly. So, depending upon the weather, on a hot day, I could lose a lot of electrolytes when
Mm-hmm.
I'm running in a marathon, and leg cramps specifically can get extremely painful and last for a long time. So I've had to learn how to properly fuel myself with water and electrolytes to prevent the cramping, and I have a solution for that works pretty well. If I stray from that at all, I can get to be a lot of pain, but it's easy to recover from that.
I see. Now that helps, and it's great to learn of how strategically you make small changes, tweak around your plan so that you
Yeah,
better.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
It's an important thing to do, I think,
Mhm.
for a Parkinson's patient or as a runner. Either of those situations, one has to be their own advocate, and they have to. And I find that I need to study up on both Parkinson's and running, and any cross studies between the two, and use that information that I'm learning to improve my life, whether it's my life as a runner or my life as Parkinson's. It's important to consider that this journey has learning opportunities, and you want to apply those learnings as you go along to inform how you're going to
Mhm.
improve the situation.
Right. So, based on your learnings and your approach, what advice will you give to people who are newly diagnosed, and or someone looking to advance their exercise regimen? So, how do they start the discovery process and explore new challenging things?
Well, as I mentioned, you want to be your own advocate for first
Mhm.
off, so get as educated as possible. I'd also say that anybody who's going to take up a vigorous exercise program should see a doctor and make sure that their medical care team
Mhm.
um, agrees, that there's no other issues going on with the patient that would prevent the
Mhm.
exercise routine. But this whole story about dopamine is extremely important. personally held the diagnosis to myself for a little while, for a couple of years, and I eventually decided that I was going to share that with the broader group of my family and my friends. And I found that to be extremely powerful. And it's not because I or anybody else wants to get sympathy for the condition. That typically doesn't help anybody. But when you share your condition with people, with your friends and families and other people that you love and who love you, they get inspired by the challenge that you're taking on. I found that in some of my crazier exploits, as far as marathons and number of marathons in a short period of time, people were inspired by that, and they wanted to talk to me about it, and they wanted to support me, and they want to tell me how much they look up to that effort. And that all of that is important for maintaining a positive attitude. And then beyond that, as you share that with people, you can become an advocate for others, and you can help others through the same journey that you've done, which is what I'm doing right here. This sort of interview, which I've had a few in the past few years, is extremely invigorating for me, and it makes a big difference that I can potentially be helping other people through the same situation that I had to deal with, and that we can all together go after this disease and slow it down, so that by the time a cure comes around, we're in much better shape to take advantage of it.
Right. That's I agree. We, as a team and supporting each other, motivating each other, we can better manage and slow it down. So as you said, you do a lot of speaking engagements, you write and you run. So what are your other hobbies apart from?
Well, I also like to cook. And, I've always liked to cook, but when I retired, I decided that I would allow my wife to take a break from having to plan all the meals every day, which she had been doing while the children were growing up. So I do that now, and so I make our dinners together, and I like to bake cookies and bring them to activities, because people always enjoy having cookies to share. It's a nice icebreaker, and when you're just meeting new people or getting together with old friends, that sort of thing. But between Parkinson's advocacy, writing, running, and cooking, that takes up a good bit of time. I mean, I'm still retired, and I do like to have my free time to do whatever I want with no structure. So yeah, that pretty much fills up my day.
Nice. And how do you plan to continue and pursuing running, supporting Parkinson's research, and finding joy in movement?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I've done it. One of my first goals after my first marathon was to run all of the world marathon majors, which are 6 races around the world, and do them all in a single calendar year. I almost did that in 2021, but because of the pandemic, Tokyo was canceled, and I got the other 5. And then when you get all 6 of them at any time that you do it, you get a 6-star medal for having achieved that, and I have that right there,
right behind.
And so but I still want to achieve that goal of having done all 6 in a calendar year. So this year I'm doing that. 2023, I'll get, I'm going around again, I'll have all 6 in the single calendar year. And then what do I do after that? I don't know yet. And that's also part of the whole journey is to come up with something novel or interesting, or something that motivates, and then figure out where to go with it. I suspect that this time around it's going to be maybe longer distances, ultra marathons, maybe trail running. It'll be running of some sort, because I do enjoy that, and I do enjoy the community of runners, which is another very positive community to be spending time with. But I don't have it all planned out, and that's part of the adventure is to
Right.
Not know exactly what you're going to do, but be willing to say yes when an interesting opportunity comes to mind.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, your dedication is truly inspiring for all of us, and we get to learn and get inspired by your commitment to keep finding new ways, new novel ways to do running and new physical activities. So that's great. It was really lovely talking to you, hearing from you how you have transformed your journey, how you have discovered the new interest, new passion of running and working and finding new ways to keep that going. So that's amazing. Thank you, Joe.
If you're interested to learn more about Joe and his journey, check out the link in the description below. Thank you.